All right, Bloodstream listeners, Amy and I are now joined by blood brother John Christian. He's got a very cool project that he's here to talk with us about today. John, welcome to Bloodstream and nice to meet you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to meet you as well.
And I should say I knew John from Colorado. We
Okay.
have we go way back. So Colorado lives on, nice and proud. So John, hi, it's nice to see you.
It's good to see you again. Yes, Amy helped me out with an insurance issue I had a while back and was really fantastic.
She's good with that stuff. That's a
And
good
now
Amy
he's
Board thing.
like a Colorado superstar. He advocates, he's gone to Washington Days several times. It's I'm not gonna lie, but I'm kind of proud of myself. I roped him in.
Yeah, it's mostly you. This is mostly about you.
For sure, for sure, for sure.
John's successes are really Amy's wins. But, you mentioned Mr. Colorado, but this project that we're here to talk about today is called Bleeding China. So, John, how does the guy from Colorado with that insurance issue that Amy was helping come upon a project called Bleeding China? What is Bleeding China?
Well, Bleeding China is actually not too far different from Colorado because the part of China I was living in was much like Western Kansas, Eastern Colorado, and a bit of the foothills as well. So somehow I traveled halfway around the world to end up at home.
Oops.
But Bleeding China is essentially, how do I put this? Back during the financial crisis in '09, I had a job and I lost that job, as many people did, and was laid off. And I had 18 months of Cobra insurance. And I really thought that this was an opportunity to take a chance and see what type of a journey I could go on. And I left Colorado and moved out to China and taught English in a kind of small remote Chinese village. And did that for a year. And over the course of the summer, I took 2 months and backpacked through the Southwest and took 24-hour train rides and yeah, lived out of a backpack in hostels for 2 whole months, and it was fantastic. And Bleeding China is my story of all of that. So it's got Chinese history, it's got bleeding disorders history, and then my lived experience as well.
Had you ever done anything like this before?
No. Um, I was fortunate to be able to travel a little bit as a child. Um, so the thought of maybe going to Europe or something along those lines wasn't too unfamiliar. And then being from Colorado, everybody goes camping and enjoys the outdoors and things like that. And really, the hemophilia treatment center out here is utterly fantastic. When we were children, they got us skiing and had a ski program for us. They always advocated on our behalf to be physically active and to work within our limits as much as possible to get things done. So they were fantastic. But no, I had a roommate at the time who suggested maybe teaching abroad would be a good way to wait out the crisis and wait until jobs would open back up again here in the States. And I jumped on that opportunity.
Why China? And did you know from the onset that you wanted to write about this experience?
um, so China, why that in particular? I got a degree in geography in school, and that encompassed everything from like plate tectonics and biomes and landscapes up to cultural geography and all about people and countries and how things happen in the world. And I took a class on China and found that to be utterly fascinating and fantastic. And at the time, back in the late 2000s, all the talk was on China and the rising dragon. And I wanted to go see what all the fuss was about, I guess.
John, when during the experience did you realize, oh, I want to document this? I want to capture this. This is something that is story worthy. How did you connect it necessarily to your hemophilia? Was hemophilia a big factor in some of your storytelling? When did it all come together?
Um, so I had no idea I was going to write about it. Had no idea I was going to enjoy writing about it.
Hmm.
Um, Essentially, I got tired of trying to write one-off emails to everybody who was asking questions about what life was like out there. So I decided to start an email thread called the Daily News, and I would write that maybe once a week or so and send that off to everybody in my email list. And then that became a fun game of writing with a pen and paper and all the things I was seeing and then transcribing that at night. And before I knew it, the list was growing organically through friends, acquaintances, and colleagues and things like that. Um, and then it just took off. So I had no intentions of writing any of this down. And then after the trip, it all went on hold for several years as I got trained to become a science teacher for middle school kids. And once my kid was born, I took a hiatus from teaching and I've been writing and working on it ever since. And he's almost 4 now. So it's been quite the journey.
What was hemophilia like in China? Like what were your challenges day to day and what were your barriers?
So the biggest challenge was I didn't tell anybody about having hemophilia. I didn't mention it in any of the email correspondence because I wasn't sure if the Chinese government was tapped into my email and to the company issued desktop computer I had in my apartment. And I didn't want anything to ruin being there. So I didn't mention anything about hemophilia. Otherwise, there was a time where I went to Taiyuan, which was the capital city of Shanxi province where I was staying. And that was an 8-hour bus ride, and it was a sleeper bus. So there's no seats in the bus. It's all just bunk beds, essentially, 3 rows of bunk beds. And I had a top bunk in the middle, and it's just enough room to stretch out and be comfortable. And you got a pillow and a blanket. And I ended up sleeping on my right elbow, funny. And my right elbow's typically been troublesome. At least it was until the medication has been really wonderful lately. And I ended up getting a bleed on that sleeper bus and woke up the next morning. And I'm now walking a couple of miles to go find some pagoda temple that I want to go check out. And I'm bending my arm back and forth, and I can tell it feels a little off and it's starting to swell. And I now need to find somewhere to infuse. And at the temple grounds, luckily they were under construction and there was a porta potty right nearby. And I took advantage of the situation and then ended up climbing a 600-year-old stone pagoda, and it had a spiral staircase that was just the width of a person and little porthole windows to be able to look out on the city. And it was dark and cramped, and had a wonderful time. Found an English bookstore and got some English books that I'd been craving for a long time, and gave a talk to a bunch of college students in a park, and those were all things that happened post-infusion. So, I mean, difficulties, but it was all manageable.
You just reminded me how silly it would seem to me at times when, oh, how did I get this bleed? By sleeping. I slept funny. Like my brother and I both growing up at times would just wake up with a bleed. And it's like, how did I get a bleed in my sleep? Like, that's ridiculous, but it happens. So I hear you on that. And I should clarify for our listeners too. So, Bleeding China, which is a Substack, where I think it's 17 posts, John, is that right? 17?
Yeah, 17 posts, 2,000 words each.
And I'm just going to read a piece of one of them. And as John already cited, there's a mix of his travel experience, the hemophilia component, what he's learning about China and Chinese history. So here's just a piece from, I believe, when you started teaching. Inside the classroom, there are 60 students in a room designed for 30. Students fill every nook and cranny. There are no aisles for one to pace. The number of bodies is suffocating. It is snowing outside, yet the windows are open. There's no central heat, no thermostat or furnace. Our collective body heat warms the room. Mr. John, my name is written in chalk on the chalkboard. I've never taught anything. I am an imposter, a fraud, a con. I'm engulfed in a new career. I'm expanding comfort zones. My hands are clammy. My face is red. My breathing is shallow and superficial. Slow down and breathe deep. After nearly a month of living here, I am teaching. John, that first day, do you remember that moment?
Luckily, that's one of the few pictures I still have, so I can picture that point. Um, but no, otherwise it's mostly completely a blur. But I can say, as I've been teaching classes, that those feelings of nerves that on the first day, they never quite go away.
What's one of the more surprising things that occurred to you or that you learned or would consider a major takeaway specifically from the teaching experience?
Just the students, really. The thing that I found really fascinating is I was living in a part of the country where most people were making maybe $5 a day, something along those lines. So there was quite a bit of poverty in that space. And the students, many of them were poor farmers' children who lived outside of the town. And maybe the farm was hour away, something like that. But many of those children were living in the school dormitories on campus. And we're talking about kids that are middle school, high school students. So maybe as early as 10 years old, they're now away from their families, and their whole job is to go to school. So they're having school for 12 hours a day from 7 in the morning till 7 at night.
Mm,
And that's going
wow.
Monday through Saturday. And then
Wow.
Sunday morning, there's a half day of class as well. So it's
Goodness.
really just all about learning, studying, and the education at that point. And that really opened my eyes to, oh, this is what working looks like. Like if you're really buckling down and you're getting it, like this is the effort that might take.
Wow. Were you ever just totally overwhelmed?
Yes, but I would say the part where I feel most overwhelmed looking back is re-entry when I returned back to the States. Because
Hmm.
by the time I came back to the States, I could understand English and everybody speaking around me, like in the grocery store, and that was very strange being back home. I could read all
Hmm.
the stop signs, street signs, building signs, and all of that was overwhelming and overstimulating. Because I had spent a whole year like all of that being white noise, background noise.
John, how has writing this, um, kind of connected you back with the community in some way? I know you're very active in the advocacy work that the Colorado chapter does. And some of the youth, like I've seen some of the Backpacks and Bleeder stuff. How has writing this been either beneficial or a hindrance to some of your work in the local community?
It's mostly been, well, 100% beneficial. And watching those kids at the climbing gym, they're like 5, 6 years old, these little bleeders, and they are just flying up the climbing wall like nothing. It's really exciting to see. And a lot of coming back to the community was trying to figure out if my experience is unique, like in terms of having a bleeding disorder, not in terms of moving out of the country or something like that. Um, but like my mother having to go to the emergency room when I was a toddler on a regular basis. And unfortunately, I was having a conversation with a lady the other night, and she has a child, and when that child was 6 months old, had a spontaneous brain bleed and ended up in the emergency room. And they also were advocating with doctors on that child's behalf. And some of the same things that were cropping up for my mom with me in the emergency room in the 80s are something that this lady was dealing with only a couple of years ago. And I found that very surprising.
John, what do you most want people to take away from Bleeding China? What do you hope people get out of reading your story?
Just to know that a story like this exists, really. The main takeaway I think I'm hoping to get out of it is maybe for that child who isn't quite sure what they can do, or is taking a meandering path through life and doesn't have priorities sorted or things like that, to just realize it's okay and that you can pick a path and travel down it and see if that works, or you can always travel a different fork in the road. Um, I think that's my main takeaway, but to be honest, I'm not sure I really have a goal with it all. I kind of want to just put it there and see what might come of it. Um, Ideally, my hope is to maybe get it published in a major publication or with like a major book publisher or something like that. But that's something that might take several years to come to fruition.
And one thing I do want to highlight here as we start to wrap up, you mentioned in the beginning of your answer there something to the effect of inspiring others to think about what they may be able to do. And I want to read down in one of your posts, you itemize all of your supplies for hemophilia, and you have them listed: 30 vials of white powder and saline solution, a 3-month supply; 140 butterfly needles for IV injection; 130 syringes; countless alcohol wipes and gauze pads. They're always countless. You never have like 5. There's always just like a box with a bajillion or none. 2 tourniquets and 1 small shoe box sized sharps container for the used needles. Now, treatments continue to improve. The burden of administration for treatments for hemophilia continues to improve. So that's wonderful. But even as I read what's here, which is a lot of stuff, there's a lot of things listed here. I could see how someone might see that and go, "Oh wow, I don't think I could ever. That's too much. That seems like." And I would just like you to have a chance to speak to somebody who feels as though what they need to do to take care of themselves with hemophilia is just too much of a challenge to ever think about doing something like spending 3 months in another country. Can you speak to that person who's a little afraid that they won't have what it takes to manage hemophilia effectively? What would you say to them?
First, I would agree with them, and I would say, yes, it is too much, and it is quite a burden. I don't think we can sweep that under the rug or try to sugarcoat that. That is a real thing. Um, but one thing is the HTC was really fantastic. They were the ones that insisted I bring a 3-month supply of medication with me. So that way we had enough time to see if packages of factor could be sent and pass through customs and make it out to me. Um, so if you're hesitant, yeah, that's a real thing. That's extremely true. But I would say no matter what happens, you can do something or you cannot. And at the end of the day, you're probably going to be more disappointed that you didn't try and didn't see what might be possible, as opposed to taking a chance and, you can always buy a plane ticket home. So at no point in time did I feel like I was in danger. I always had extra medication, and I knew if I ever got down to 2 weeks left and I wasn't getting a reshipment, I was going to have to go home.
Fair. I appreciate that perspective. So, listeners, I encourage you to check out bleedingchina.substack.com. We'll have a link in the program notes as well. Again, that's bleedingchina.substack.com. All 17 posts of John's are there for you to read and share as you see fit. John, there's so much here that we could dig into, and perhaps down the road we'll pick back up with you. And I'd love to know responses that you get, because you only just recently published this all. Is that correct?
Yes, in the last week or so. So just in the past few days.
Super exciting. So it'd be fun to catch up down the road a bit to hear the kind of feedback you've gotten, any new ideas that have sparked as a result of that. So again, bleedingchina.substack.com. John Christen, thanks for your time today, and we'll catch up with you in a few months' time.